Today is our first ever neurodiversity panel today, starting off this whole year, and I'm super excited. So just to give you a little bit of background, HireTool is a recruitment software that helps you take your organization to the next level by building for tomorrow on the talent acquisition systems of today. HireTool has been around since 2015, and we're just doing amazing work. So unfortunately, you can only see our cute faces. We wish we could see y'all's beautiful faces, but I want to let you know that we will be taking questions at the end. So any questions you have, message it to us. I'll vet them and everything. I'm going to stop talking and hopefully my cat doesn't jump in the frame, but I want to go ahead and introduce our panelists. Emily, you're like Brady Bunch first above me. So if you want to go ahead, introduce yourself, feel free to use pronouns where you're from and what you do.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's weird. It's not in there in my name. It's almost always in there. I'll add it. I'm Emily. I'm she, her. I use she, her pronouns. I am in rainy Portland, Oregon right now. Originally from New York, but I moved here about 20 years ago. And what else? What I do?
Yes.
I'm an entrepreneur. I started my own business in 2018, officially in 2019. And I support other underestimated founders to try to make it through the first 5 years. And I'm also co-founder of Rage to Rainbows with Madison, where we're combating trolls online.
Nice. Tim, you're technically next if you want to go ahead.
I'm Tim Banks. I'm currently principal cloud economist at the Duckbill Group, coming from now as of this year, 25-year career in tech. Starting back in the days when they were preparing for the Y2K bug. Prior to that, I was educated in, started my tech education in the Marine Corps. That's just how I pay the bills, but I am actually a world-class jiu-jitsu practitioner. So behind me, you'll see medals for various jiu-jitsu accomplishments. So I pay for my jiu-jitsu by working in tech. And aside from that, I do what I can to uplift and advocate for marginalized folks in tech and in the community.
Awesome. Okay, Maddie, you're next.
My name is Maddie. I am coming to you from Rhode Island, specifically in the room directly underneath Reese right now. In Rhode Island, we are on the land of the Narragansett people. And for anyone who is visually impaired, I'm wearing a yellow sweater. I have blue hair. I have wild green glasses. I'm also the VP of people at Grab. I work in the cannabis e-com space. And outside of that, I spend a lot of my time working with organizations who, like Emily, are in the early stages of business on what it means to scale equitably and safely.
Okay, and last but never least, Rachel.
Hello, my name is Rachel Couples. A lot of you may know me as Rachel Kitty Couples, my middle name. I am a corporate diversity recruiter. I'm at about week 2.5 at Textio, and I got my place, you guys. I'm loving it there. My pronouns are she, her. And I started my career out in sales and fell in love with recruiting and have been doing that for about 9.5 years. The last 6 years, I've really focused on I'm obsessed with candidate experience and, helping those that wouldn't normally have an opportunity to interview, find ways to get in front of hiring managers. So I'm very excited to be here and talk about what we're talking about today.
Awesome. Well, I'm very excited for y'all to be here too. And so basically, I see a question already for the closed captions. We will have it after the recording for anybody, so we can send it out as well too. So just wanted to make sure that was clear, because I also got a text from you, Emily, so thank you for that. Anyways, so this panel is about neurodiversity. And so basically, for some of those who don't know what it is, it's basically a range of differences in individual brain functions. Some can be ADHD, autism, dyslexia, OCD, Tourette's. There's a whole list of it. So I kind of want to just like kick this conversation off, and I'm gonna go with we'll go with you, Rachel. Like how do you identify as neurodiverse, 1, and 2, how did you find out about it?
Oh, so no one's ever asked me that question before.
I know.
So thank you for that. Thank you for that.
For you too, so.
I think, at the end of how do I identify, this is newer to me. It goes back to, it's easy for me in my mid 40s to look back, 20, 30 years ago for what it was like growing up or even being, in elementary school and learning and whatnot. So I was not, they gave me a multivitamin and told me to, learn more. My family just didn't know what they didn't know, because I was either getting A's or D's, depending upon whether or not I was interested in a topic. So as far as how I identify, I was 33 years old when I was diagnosed officially with ADHD. And I think a lot of my, the last 10, 15 years has been working through my own stigmas and having to unlearn what I have been, taught, or what's the word, what I've been sort of conditioned to think. When I was told that we go see a mental health specialist to get a true diagnosis for ADHD, it took me 6 months to be okay with that. And it's the best thing that ever happened to me. So full circle, I don't know if I'm answering your question. But I am on a journey to, and continue to be, to live 100% authentically as myself and give myself permission to do that. And there's a lot of layers as a woman and, other things that come with that, but I'm still on that journey. And I can tell you this, for the first time in my career, when I did a presentation for the role I'm in right now, I presented myself as a non-neurotypical recruiter. And just, that might've been scary. That definitely would have been scary in the past, to be like, this is who I am. This is how I communicate, but this is what I bring to the table. And so I'm in uncharted territory, being 100%, I guess, open and my true self with neurodiversity.
Awesome. I love that. And then Maddie, I know the story because, go ahead and tell everybody how you found out and how you identify.
So I have ADHD and I struggle with a lot of executive function. So it is very easy for me to get overwhelmed, or if there is a task at hand and the task is a lot, I have no idea where to start. And I remember having instances in college where my room would be so messy, which I'm not clean because I'm clean, but organization is not my jam at all. Everything has to be in a tab, otherwise I'll never find it again. And I remember being so overwhelmed that I would have to have a friend come to my room and be like, okay, here's where you start cleaning. And here's what you do next. And here's what you do next. And I always thought everyone had that problem and issue. And then one day in my 20s, my mom was like, oh no, you have ADHD. You were diagnosed when you were 7, but I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want it to impact how you viewed yourself as a Black woman already navigating hard scenarios. And so Rachel, now looking back, I'm like, oh my God, so much of what I've struggled with makes so much more sense now that I know what I know. And so for me, it's interesting because I had to learn to essentially self-cope and self-medicate because I didn't know that I had ADHD. And being able to look back, I can allow myself to mess up a little bit more. I always thought there must be something wrong or I must just be messing up, versus not understanding that it was actually something with me that I didn't understand. And being able to kind of transition into a world where Rachel, I can say, okay, well, this is who I am. If you meet me, I'm probably going to be a little bit all over the place. And that's something that I've come to really enjoy about myself. And if you don't enjoy it, then I'm probably not the right practitioner or right person for you to work with.
Somebody said unicorn sparkles, which is just, it's you. So Tim, what about you and how you identify and everything?
So I identify as ADHD on the what used to be categorized as ADD because I have I have inattentive spectrum on the ADHD. That's also coupled with the comorbidities of anxiety and rejection sensitive dysmorphia for me. And it's interesting because I identified very much with Madison saying where executive functions and where organization comes in. Because I have ADHD, it's very difficult for me to focus on something to get something accomplished, unless it's something I have anxiety about, in which case then that overrides my inability to executive function and I will have it planned out to the nth degree. So, maybe I don't, my closet may not be organized, but if you grab my bug out bag, that thing is spectacularly organized. So it's interesting how they manifest itself. And so for me, I also, very well, you being, finding out that you'd been diagnosed as a child spoke to me very much, because I was officially re-diagnosed with ADHD when I was 44. But it turns out I had been diagnosed with ADHD when I was 6. But this was 1981 in Southern Virginia. And I had two, not lower middle class parents, but two parents that were working parents that struggled very hard. And so ADHD meds weren't going to be feasible for them to afford, number one. And number two is the same thing. They didn't want me to have the stigma at the time of being, someone who had special needs, because in the 80s, that wasn't great. And so, for me, it wasn't multivitamins. It was, for being frank, it was discipline in the belt that really got me through school. My parents had to fight the school administration to at least get me in gifted and talented classes, which is pretty much the best they could do at the time, because they wanted to say that I was lazy or I couldn't focus or function, that I need to be in one of the what they called special education classes at the time. And that was not where I needed to be. So the notion for having a child of color, because I'm half Black and half Mexican, having a child of color to be in the gifted and talented program, I was the first one in the school system, a non-white child or non-Asian child, to be in the gifted and talented program, because my parents had to advocate very, very fiercely for me. And so I feel like I've had the experience that started to have the experience that so many other, Black men and other men of color or people of color have had, where they get marginalized into class environments that are not going to suit them, because that's just what you did with people of color back then. And the other thing too was that I was very, very much identified with the A's or D's, because that's the same thing. I would get A's on all my tests and I would A's and stuff like that, but don't give me homework because I'm not going to do it. Projects were done the night before. I would get great grades on them, but they were always done the night before. And so I, through my career, I learned to balance kind of those needs and recognize it in others. Now that I know I've been diagnosed and I know that what it is, I've been going through and trying to help others. Like, hey, I see this thing in you. I'm not saying you are, but you may want to get looked at for it, because I recognize some of the same tendencies, and it's helped out, I think, for others as well as myself.
Yeah, for sure. And then, sorry, excuse me, Emily, go right ahead.
Can I share my screen?
I get, yes, you can. You should have co-hosting it access.
Okay. I think I told you I was gonna. Okay, so this is from like 1985 or something. This is my report card that I found like this year. My mom sent me a whole bunch of junk, and it's like, Emily has the ability to do quite well, but she's so easily distracted and it interferes with her performance. And then it says, listens to instructions, depends on the day. And that's one of them. The other one that I have is that my constant socializing is disturbing to my classmates and has to be reminded to focus, blah, 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 blah. Has a lot of energy, but wish that they would channel it in a better manner, a more positive manner. So that pretty much sums up my life in school, which is kind of amazing. It is amazing, right, Sherry? I found those and was like, hello, people, hello, like what? My mom had to like read things for me sometimes, right? And I can read, but like I had so many challenges reading in school that it was crazy. And so, sorry, not to use that word crazy, but it was totally bananas. And yet I did really well in other things. So like I relate to a lot of that. Also, Rachel, same thing with the coming out. This is like my coming out this year of like just really talking about it more openly. I wish that I had done it sooner. So I have ADD. I still don't identify as ADHD, even though I have energy and stuff. The new diagnosis does not make sense to me. So I don't subscribe to it yet. But I have in my family a history of, there's a history of severe mental health problems, anxiety, OCD, depression, suicide. And so, it's so hard to say what other things that I could be diagnosed with because they overlap with ADD. And so in therapy, it's like, well, you could have this, you could have that. And I was telling Reese, I joke, I saw a tweet that said, something about like the spectrum of like going from discovering you have ADD to like autism. And it's like the steps that you take to be like, oh, I have this, this, and this. So I've been really interested in learning more about autism. And I don't, there are certain things that I definitely don't have, but other things that really make sense to me. And I do have what Tim mentioned, rejection sensitive dysphoria, terribly. RSD is really bad. For any of you that don't know what that is, it basically means you think people are mad at you all the time. That's like the best way to describe it. You think that you are constantly like letting people down. But the thing that's weird about it is and I also have sensory processing disorder or SPD. So I have like, I'm very sensitive to things, which is why the autism thing's interesting to me, because I think a lot of, oh, Steph, I know when I found out it was a thing, I was like, oh, so just like Madison, I didn't know that a lot of this was just like, my whole life, I was like, oh, this makes so much sense. I just thought other people thought like this. I also thought that other people thought the way that I did, which is constant, all the time, narration in my head. I just assumed everybody did that and had no idea until several years ago that wasn't the case. But like what I wish that I had known, so I self-diagnosed in my late teens, early 20s, and then got a diagnosis when I was like 24 or 26. I was getting divorced and the therapist was like, you don't have depression, you have ADD. And I was like, yeah, I don't feel sad. I just feel like totally, it kind of made sense. But I didn't talk about it at work ever. And I wish that I had, because I think that, well, one, it would have helped destigmatize, which I really believe in as somebody who had a parent who committed suicide. I think the other thing is that like nobody understood me and got mad at me a lot for my behavior that would have been that now is totally understood and just not always fully accepted, but at least makes sense, like why I interrupt or why I go on for way too long, those kind of things. And so especially with working with me one-on-one or with my team, I find it so much more helpful to just talk about all of this stuff right away. Because it affects feedback. Like the RSD stuff really affects feedback and how you take feedback. And it's the weird thing for me is that with, at least for me, because I have the neurodiversity things that I have, I'm really, really aware of other people's feelings, from like a flinch, like a flicker in their eye to like a flinch on their face. I can read people really well. And my partner's like really annoyed by that. He's like, you can't read my thoughts. I'm like, I know, but I kind of can. And so the thing about RSD is that people might not be rejecting you fully, but they're definitely thinking something judgy and you can tell. So I don't know if that relates. I see nods. So that's good. Cause I always was like, that's my theory. I really do feel like I can tell when people are like, having this internal monologue of, oh gosh, she's too much. Like I can tell when they really think that and when I am being too much. And so it kind of like makes you self-conscious, and then you continue to be too much even more because you're compensating and you're in your own head while you're trying to act normal. So learning about that was really liberating for me to know that that's just like how my brain works. Yeah. And also to just know like how important it is for people to know that about me, so that they know why like I don't trust, or why I like how I need them to show up so that I can trust them. Right. And then also like, so they can tell me like, you're fine, but here's the deal, yep. and then I won't have to take it personally. So that is me. I think I covered everything.
You did. Tim, I see your hand raised. Are you just one-upping with Emily, or do you have something to say?
No, I think I wanted to say it's interesting because the hyper functioning that folks with RSD do to try to stem the feeling of rejection they have it's incredible. And like, again, it's one of those things that I didn't know that I did until it was pointed out like this is not how it is for everyone else. But like Emily said, like the noticing every detail of someone's body language, and you become very, very accustomed to trying to react to that because you don't want to feel that rejection. The predicting someone's needs and meeting those needs that you think that they have before they have the chance to communicate them. Like you get so accustomed to going above and beyond and doing all these things that no one ever asked you to do, because you don't want to feel like you've let anyone down, because the feeling that you've let someone down is catastrophic, right? It's not just like, oh, I've let someone down. It's like, if you told me that you were disappointed in me, that is crippling to me for my feelings. Like I'm just jacked up for quite some time. So you get used to I just lost the word I was thinking about, but over executing for others, and letting your needs and stuff like that go aside. And so it's someone in the chat asked, like, how do you give feedback to someone with RSD? And it's difficult. Like when I have to, first of all, now that I know I have it, it gives me a framework in which to understand my own feelings. So, but if you know that someone has that, as cliche it is, the compliment sandwich works on me, right? Because I know you don't hate me and I know I'm doing a good job. I can work on this thing better, or that was better, but everything is still okay. And you love me. And so it's funny because like my partner who's listening, they will be like, okay, it's okay. And I love you, but this, and this, and this. And I'm like, okay, now that I know that you don't hate me and everything is good. And then sometimes I have to be like, hey, I know you told me this. I just need to know that you don't hate me. And so it's like, there's some point of it where other folks are like aware of it and taking steps, but also there's me advocating for myself and saying, hey, I need to know this because I'm feeling a certain way about it. And so that's one way that I've, my therapist, the radical self-love, where I'm saying like, hey, I need this for me. I just need to know. Right.
Oh, did Tim freeze on y'all? Because he froze on my end.
He froze a little.
Okay. I was about to say, because I'm definitely that same way with Maddie. It's like, I know I feel like I've done something and I'm like, but I need to make sure that you're okay with me still. Like, I think it's like that reassurance that I always need, even when it's like personal life or in work too. It's like, no, I know that, I messed up, but I need that reassurance. And I think, thank y'all for sharing your experiences. Because for me, I was I was diagnosed at like the age of 10 and put on medicine all the way up through college. And so for me, I identify as ADHD, a little bit of dyslexic and everything like that. And so it was definitely one of those things where, since I was playing sports, all of my parents were like, oh no, we can't have them on their medicine at all. We can't have them during, when they're participating in playing softball, they can't be on medicine. And so like my schedule was, I would take one pill in the morning. I would take one that like lasted about 6 hours, take a break. And then I would take one after practice, because my practice would be 2 hours long. And I did that all the way through college. It was like, and when I was on my medication, I was like, zombie. You could walk into this room and steal the cat or steal my monitor and I would not. It was like I was so hyper focused and I needed that. And especially when it came to like, I'm a horrible test taker. So anytime like the ACTs, SATs, I was always put into that separate room from everybody and had somebody like, I had extra time on all my tests. They would fill out my test sheets for me because I couldn't take, the letter A from one page of the paper to the next one either. So it was super hard for me just to like realize when I was in college, I was like, I don't like the way that this medicine like makes me feel, because I don't feel like my full self. And recently realizing who I actually am now, like a year and a half or years later, like who I really want to be. And I know that medicine is so, it definitely can help in certain situations, but for me, it like hindered who I was when it was trying to figure out what I was, like what I want to do in school and everything like that. And so I think like probably all of us always get this question asked, but like, how did it make you feel once you found out you were diagnosed or self-diagnosed yourself? Maddie, I'll start with you.
So I actually feel like when I found out, I was relieved because it gave me answers to a lot of the questions I had. However, previously when I was struggling with like staying organized, or like I do this thing where I'll like write an email and then I'll be like, oh my God, I gotta go do that thing. And then I'll go do that thing. And then in the middle of doing that thing, I'll be like, oh my God, I gotta go do this thing. And I just thought I was really bad at like my job and at work and at like being a partner, because I am like so all over the place all of the time, because one, I'm like a wild perfectionist. So I'm like, oh my God, I gotta get this thing. I gotta get this thing. And so I felt really bad about myself for a very long time, because I thought that I was like broken, essentially. And so for me, I actually felt very relieved to know that there was some level of explanation behind it. And also I think it took a lot of unpacking to like understand that none of us are broken. We all come differently. And that's the beauty of all of this. And so I think that does take a lot of unpacking to feel like, yes, I'm different and that's okay, versus yes, I'm different and that's a hindrance to me. And it's taken me a long time to get to that place.
And do you think, okay, well, because I know you, do you think that it would have changed you when you're in like high school and everything like that? Like, do you think it was better that your mom didn't tell you until you're out of college? Or do you think it would have been better for you beneficially as growing up and everything like that?
I think the answer is probably a little bit of both. I think because I'm also, you know, like Tim, I was a Black child who had very strict parents. I think, yes, maybe it would have been nice to know that like, oh gosh, like things are okay. You're just overwhelmed because of this. But I also think, again, there is a lot of stigma when you're already what is considered like a gifted child. There's a lot of pressure in that. And I think that pressure would have been made so much worse knowing that there was a diagnosis as well, because I'm an only child as well. So it was like, I had to be good at everything. I had to be really smart. I had to get straight A's. I had to play sports and I had to be good at them. And then I also had to be like the good child and all of these things. And so there was already like all of this mounting pressure about just existing, because the only thing that my mom did tell me when I got tested, because obviously I was there and I got tested. And so I asked for like what happened, was that I had a genius IQ when it came to like the English language and words and understanding words. That was the only thing I got. So like there was already pressure with that. So I actually think that in this instance, like, yes, would it have been nice to know? Probably, but I also think I would have held myself back knowing it.
Yeah. Okay. Rachel, what about you?
I think for me, I think it would have helped to know when I was younger, you know, going back to that part of the question, because I did spend, like, I think everybody's mentioned this, like, I've been told my whole life that I'm a lot, you know, and that's a nice way of saying you're overwhelming me, or, you know, whatever that person is feeling. But for me, like, one of the most defining moments was in, I think it was 2018. And so this is, you know, maybe five or so years after my diagnosis. I've told the story before. I was sitting in Seattle here at a SourceCon, and one of the speakers on stage was talking about neurodiversity and asked, you know, how many of you in here, and it's a room full of sourcers and recruiters, believe you have ADHD or ADD or have been diagnosed. And I kid you not, like, it felt like the whole room raised their hand. It was probably, you know, 65% or more. But I remember, and I get goosebumps right now just saying it, just that feeling, because I looked around and I realized, wow, like I'm sitting in a room full of people that have figured out, and again, this was my assumption at the time, but, you know, have figured out how to take this thing, you know, you know, neurodiversity, and turn it into something, use it for good, for, you know, these are very successful business owners and senior recruiters, like people that I admire and strive to be like, and they're just like me. So what has truly been the most impactful, and I'll stop talking in circle, is finding others like myself, and others that maybe have the same diagnosis, but it shows up a little bit differently, right? Because we're all different. So that's helped me the most, just, I guess, in moving forward with my diagnosis and getting braver with talking about it.
Yeah. And so I'm going to now transition it more to like the work atmosphere. So Emily, I'm going to start this question for you. You know, how does your neurodiversity impact your work and everything like that? Like, what are some strategies you have that can help others? Because a lot of people feel that we are a safe group in here, which I love. So I would love to hear, you know, how does it impact your work every single day? You know, what helps you out the most?
Well, I'll absolutely answer that. Basically, to sum that up really quick, work for yourself. But that's my like little spiel. We'll come back to that. But I really quickly, I just wanted to answer, because I've seen it come up a few times, and it's something that I think about all the time, which is like, now we're all in here talking about how we have ADD or ADHD, but we're not talking about anything else really. What's the word? Like salacious isn't really the word, but like bipolar, all these things.
Yep.
And somebody asked, is that because of stigma? Because, we're all trying to destigmatize. And I think that for sure is, right? Like I, through, my life have had different diagnoses but the thing is that none of it's definitive, right? And so the only way that you kind of figure out what you have is like through medication and meeting other people and practice and seeing like what works for you. And then also what you align with, right? And so I think that for now, the reason that we're all able to talk about it is because it aligns with who we are and what we know of ourselves. But I've had severe depression in my life for sure. Like, I mean, there's no doubt. And my whole family deals with anxiety and depression. I've had periods of panic in my life. I've had lots of other things. And, even my dad, like I had the realization, I kid you not, within the last month, because I said it in the laundry room and Jake, my partner, was like, duh. But I was like, oh my God, my dad had terrible ADD, like horrible. And he suffered from really bad depression. He was diagnosed bipolar, but always said, I'm not bipolar, because there wasn't bipolar 2 then. And he didn't believe he was manic. And I can see it from both sides, right? And so a lot of ADD people believe like, we're not manic, we're just energized about things. But people think that we're like going off the rails, and it's not actually going off the rails. It's just really, we're going for it. And a lot of times we get gaslit for that too, which is a really thing that I struggle with a lot, which is like, when I started to talk about it more open, I felt like people got really comfortable with being like, oh, there they go again, like, and in a way that actually was like almost the same as if like I had been shamed for not knowing what was going on, right? So that was a bummer. Matt, you have your hand raised. So, yeah.
It was just to go after you.
Oh my God.
Oh, go after me. Okay, sure. But I need to answer Reese's other question. So that's perfect neurodiversity. I just wanted to respond to that because I feel like it's something that comes up a lot, and it is really hard to talk about in the workplace. I think, we'll talk about that a little bit more, but so how I manage it in the workplace, that was the question, correct?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So first of all, horribly, I managed it horribly because I never talked about it in work until I pretty much like left corporate, because I couldn't I couldn't work in that environment without constant rejection, harassment, bullying, all sorts of stuff. And also it was like, I work in ad agencies and creative, like, I worked for Nike for 12 years, like sports giants. They're so misogynistic and racist and sexist and just really not great cultures to be in. So if you're different and you hang out with different people and you look different, like, it's just, I'm not, I don't play pong and, drink beer, and I didn't really fit in. So that was a huge part of it. The other part of it is that, like, I'm an introvert, but you wouldn't know it, right? And I was always like kind of borderline introvert, extrovert, but I need so much alone time because of the amount of sensitivity I have, and especially the, like sensory stuff that, like, I just, at the end, sometimes I just like literally need, don't touch me, and I have kids. So I'm going to talk about that later, because I think that's something that really needs to be addressed as parenting with this. But, just like at the end of the day, I don't want anybody to touch me. I don't want the dog barking. I need a padded cell. And I always joke, like, it would be so great if I could have a room that was like bare, right? Even though ADD people, we don't have rooms that are bare. We have stuff everywhere usually. So I left corporate, and part of the reason I left corporate was that I just couldn't do it. So I wanted to work for myself. And I wanted to make it a place where I also have a bunch of chronic health things. So I and I know Maddie can relate to this. She's like, I just want to work when I can work best. I don't want to have to be there at 9 in the morning or 8 in the morning and have to be on all day, because I'm going to be on all night no matter what. I am a complete night owl. And so, I just had to make it work for myself, and I wanted to make companies that work for other people. And I had tried for so long within corporate America to do that. And like, I had joined every group imaginable to like try to usher in change in these companies. And it just wasn't working. And I finally was like, and Maddie and I have this theory, you got to build from the ground up. And so I really wanted to build my own company and help other people build companies that just embrace this kind of thing from the very beginning, so that it's just like in the culture, you just are who you are, and that's okay.
Yep. Maddie, since your hand is raised, you can go ahead, I guess.
I just really wanted to plus one Emily on the concept of being told that you're too much, because I've been told I've been too much since the time I was like small. And it took me until now to be able to ask myself the question, am I too much, or am I specifically too much for you? And that's been really hard to understand that, one, I'm not for everyone and not everyone's going to like me. And there's nothing I can do about that. And that comes to where you work, who you work for, who you work with. Because at the end of the day, we all have to ask ourselves, like, does this space deserve me? And that's really hard to acknowledge, that not every space is going to be right for you. But I think oftentimes we're all told we're too much, tone it down, water yourself down, make yourself more palatable, whatever it is, whether it's your Blackness or your neurodiversity or however you identify. And I think it's really, really hard to come to terms with not everyone liking you, and you having to walk away from some rooms and people and family and partners because they do not support you or serve your growth.
I never know what to say after you do the mic drops and everything like that. Tim, go ahead. I know you want to speak.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of interesting aspects too, especially when it comes to the workplace. Like, Madison said, like, we're often told to tone ourselves down, especially as people of color in the tech industry. But I've kind of curated my varying states of neurodiverseness, to suit my professional needs. Like I said, I have anxiety, apparently pretty badly, but it makes me really good at being a site reliability engineer, because I predict every possible way that something could break, and then I start automating against it, right? And folks are like, wow, you're really good at this. I'm like, thanks, because I want to feed my family. And, in my mind, it's like, oh, well, if I'm not really good at this, my family's going to be out in the street and it's going to be all my fault. So, these things get kind of coupled all together. And so it's like, it's not that I'm putting my neurodiversity on a platform to everyone say, hey, look at me, neurodiverse. I am neurodiverse. It is part of who I am. It is part of my personality. It is part of who I am as a person. So if you're going to leverage that for your gain, right, you're also going to have to deal with what I have to say and who I am as a whole person. Otherwise you can GTFO. And so that's been a thing that I've really had to advocate for myself for, with being unapologetically Black and being unapologetically queer and being unapologetically ADHD and all the other ways, if I go to list this, CPTSD, RSD, almost life-threatening depression, so all of that, you get all of that. And it's very interesting that you said, like, Madison, like, am I too much or am I too much for you? And, I said, I've got a partner who's had to deal with all the various aspects of who I am. And I know I am a lot, right? And I'm okay with that. Right. I've had to be okay with that. And if I'm up too much for somebody, that's fine. I don't, and everyone's got their boundaries. If I'm too much for you, that's fine. That's not a slam on you. But that's certainly not a slam on me. Like, we don't have to we can change the parameters of how we interact with each other, because it's okay to be too much for somebody. And it's okay for me to be as much as I am. But that's not a thing. If I'm too much for you, that has nothing to do with me. Right. Those are your boundaries. Those are where you are. These are mine. Right. But I'm, in the year of our Lord 2022, I am past apologizing for myself, even though I still do. I'm that's not something I want to do anymore. I don't want to apologize for being the way I am. And, given the combination of how I was born, how my brain works, and then a society that says, well, you shouldn't be this way. No, sweetie, not today, and not tomorrow either.
I love all that. And I think, for myself too, it's like whenever I was applying for a job, like I never put down that I had ADHD because I didn't want people to know, because I always just like, oh no, you're going to put me in a little bubble. So like, what for any of y'all that want to answer this, like, what is your advice to anybody that is neurodiverse to like make sure that they show up as their true selves? Because I think that's one of the biggest things that like I never put it down because I didn't want it to like hinder me ever getting a job, because it's always scary when you see that form and you're like, oh no, I can't put down that I identify this way. So does anybody have any like advice or anything like that for folks that are, you know, applying for a role or just trying to encourage people to show up as their true authentic self?
I do, but I think Rachel, you wanted to.
Oh yeah, I'm like trying to give you the eye, like go ahead. Well, this is exactly why one of many reasons why I gravitated towards becoming a recruiter. I was selling staffing, you know, was a branch manager of a staffing agency, but it wasn't giving me really what I wanted. And what I saw in the temp to hire world that I was working in, and the you know, day labor, or, you know, in that industry was a bunch of people coming in that could have been me. Now, with the privilege that I grew up with, and, you know, the rooms that I was able to be in and referrals throughout my life, you know, really helped push my career. But there was a room full of people that didn't have the same opportunities as I did. But honestly, I saw myself in all of them. Like they, you know, and it took me a few years later, you know, to really figure it out. But when I worked for a local nonprofit here in Seattle. It's a social enterprise that works with children and adults with disability and promoting, you know, education and work for all. And that was the first time in my career, that was 2016, like the fall of 2016, where I actually was able to tell somebody, or I felt like there wouldn't be like retaliation, or I wouldn't be looked down upon, that I had ADHD. And that was, even though I was working for an organization that embraced diversity, and especially around disability, it was one of the scariest things I've ever done. I still was afraid. And that's why, you know, when I saw you post about, you know, this event coming up, I'm so passionate about this, because it is so important, not just for us to talk about this, but for folks who are neurotypical to consider non-neurotypical folks and how we learn, how we communicate, how we speak, and really look at their organization and provide an open, you know, sort of safe space for people to, you know, share what they're dealing with. Maybe they're going through getting diagnosed, maybe they've been diagnosed, but if it weren't for great leaders in the last few years around me, I would not have been, as crazy as it sounds, you know, at almost 44 years old, brave enough to finally show up to a final interview, you know, a couple of weeks ago and say, this is who I am. I don't know if I'm rambling, but I think at the end of the day, we need more allies, and more folks that are willing to listen to us and ask us about us. Because as everyone here has said, you may not know this about me. I'm a huge Wonder Woman fan, but I know there's a controversy with calling disability superpowers. But at the end of the day, I feel like it's our kryptonite. Or for me, it's my kryptonite and it's my superpower. I've been able to find that, you know, I can use my skills and who I am. Being a recruiter, it's using like the most of me for the best reasons. But at the same time, how are my leaders going to pull better out of me, right? I want to keep growing, but I also want to be considered, instead of just being the one that's worried about, you know, if I'm interviewing Tim or Maddie, how are they feeling? You know, or how are my hiring managers feeling? It's good to have folks, and I realize I'm talking in a circle. It's just good to have community around you of neurotypical and non-neurotypical that support you. And that it doesn't happen enough in the workplace.
Yeah, it kind of like brings me back a little bit to like how there's like queer folks in the workplace too. Like
exactly.
The allies are the ones that help support us. And I think that's 100% positive and true when it comes to the neurodiversity folks at an organization, because it's hard to not know that like, oh, I could be the only non-binary person or something like this, but like I'm also ADHD. I know there's somebody else somewhere that also identifies the way that I identify. Emily, I saw that you raised your hand and then put it down real quick.
Okay, so a couple things. You were talking about like when you apply for jobs and the stigma around it. And I think of that a lot with the form at the end where they're like, nobody's going to see this and it won't be on your application, but here, check all these boxes. And I was like, because I have all these other chronic health things, I was like, wow, I check a lot of boxes. I didn't think I did. I've worked my whole life with people with disabilities. That was actually like, I would say not my first cause, if you will, but that's something that I did like even as a teen. And my best friend's brother is a quadriplegic, has cerebral palsy. And so we like volunteered in group homes, and I was like very active in the disability community. My sister ended up becoming a disability rights advocate in New York State and working for the state. And so I was like, oh, wait, I'm part of that. Like I didn't even really identify as part of that community, even though until I had one of the health things that I had was like seriously physically debilitating, and I couldn't walk or get out of bed. And so that was when I started to like be like, oh, these things, because again, like what a lot of us said, we assume everybody thinks this way. We didn't know that other people don't have this constant thing in their brain, or just the challenges. So I think one of the reasons that I started being more open about it was when I started doing research on all of the ways that I want to be inclusive at work. And that was, in the last 5-10 years, when I started trying to work within corporate America and then on my own. I want people to show up everywhere as them full selves, like gender, sexual identity, like all of that stuff. Pronouns, your hair natural, whatever you need to do to show up as you are, in pajamas or not, and changing your sweater 2 seconds before, great. So I feel like that was when I really started to be like, I don't want any part of anyone to be a stigma. And I don't think that if I don't talk about it, and I'm a talker like Madison, I just talk about stuff. So I think a lot of us are, right, ADD people. And so, right, everybody in the chats, I was thinking how funny it is that this is one of the most active chats. And I was like, of course it is.
Of course, yeah.
But, I just think the thing about the workplace stuff too, is that like the statistics around people with disabilities are not good, and people aren't getting hired. And a lot of people, I see a lot of threads on LinkedIn of people trying to get jobs that have taken a really long time. And I know from working with clients that are looking for jobs and have been applying for years, a lot of times I'll be like, oh, they're neurodiverse, right? Maybe they don't know it or identify it as that, but I can sort of just say so those statistics need help, just like any other area of inclusion. And also I've started to lose my hearing. So as I lose my hearing too, I'm like, people need to know you have to show up differently, or I will literally not be able to work with you at all. And so I don't know, I could lose my hearing next week. I mean, we all could, but I could lose my hearing within a year, and it's going to look really different for me. So I might as well start getting people used to it. But again, that's why I started my company, was I just wanted people to be able to show up. And, I don't know the Venn diagram of people with, comorbidities of pain. But I have a lot of people that have a lot of chronic pain that I work with that I would say are neurodiverse, and you just can't work the regular hours. And there are days where you just can't do it. And the amount of times that I pushed through in corporate America, with really debilitating pain that would have crippled most people, or even, the other things I had that made me have terrible vertigo. And I could literally I couldn't drive, but I was at work. I don't want to do that anymore, because I don't want that for my kids. I don't want anybody to have to show up like that.
Yeah. Tim, I see your little hand up.
Yeah. So I think it's very interesting in the workplace, because, when the way that folks who are neurodiverse, their neurodiversity manifests itself in different ways in the workplace. And so a lot of times I feel like, especially folks when giving, if someone is whatever it looks like for them to underperform or whatever, the first thing that I would ask as a leader is okay, is there a need that you have that's not being addressed? And so for me, I've been working remote primarily now for 5 years, and I probably can never really go back to an office, because I can't just sit in a desk and work. Can't do it. My work day looks like I'm going to open up, I'm going to work a little bit, and then I know I'm going to get distracted. So I'm going to build that into my schedule. And if you don't see me online or at my desk, I may just be behind my desk sleeping. and that's okay, right? Because I'm going to get my stuff done. But the notion of having to sit there at a desk and do a thing, not going to happen for me. And so I know if I need to concentrate on something, I will reach out to somebody, be like, hey, I need to get something done. And I know I'm not going to do it unless I schedule some time with you and you can just sit there and work, and that's fine. But while you're sitting there and working, I'm going to do this thing. And I just need you to be like, hey, how's it coming along? And if you just do that for an hour, I'm great. But these are things that I've had to do for myself. And what I would like to see is these patterns being built into ways that leaders respond to folks who maybe aren't performing what they feel like they need to be, to make sure that the leaders, folks who are neurotypical, have a framework for making sure that a neurodiverse person's needs are met so that they can actually get the job functions done. And so these conversations are a start of that. And it's great that folks who are neurodiverse have this safe space to be, but we need to have the conversation, just like we need to do for conversation about race or other forms of marginalization. We have to have these conversations with folks who are in leadership so that they know how to deal with our needs, instead of just saying, well, they're not performing, so, put them on a PIP and leave it and throw them out to the wolves.
Yeah. Yeah. Rachel, go ahead. I see your hand.
Just real quick. I just wanted to add, a lot of times in leadership and in organizations is, they're growing, whether it's a, nonprofit, startup, corporate, doesn't really matter the industry. We focus on not just leveraging each employee's strengths, but we focus on how do we get where an employee is maybe lacking, or our perception of where they're lacking. How do we get that up to the bar, rather than really taking and harnessing I think we've all probably been called, outgoing or a lot, or contagious, or, in good positive ways, and also in negative ways. So learning to leverage as an organization the strengths of your employees, rather than focusing on where your employees may not be as strong, I think is a game changer. Because at the end of the day, if people are happiest and most productive doing what they love, and they're typically what you love. The reason we are the A and D students, is because all those areas that I got A's, I could promise you I had teachers that understood me. They made me feel like they saw me for who I was. And they were subjects and topics where I could do what I was passionate about or what I enjoyed. So I think that learning how, not just how people learn in the workplace, but organizations could truly, I think, change the game and be all of their competition if they learned how to embrace all of the diversity within their organization and leverage it for good.
100%. Maddie, go ahead.
So I was going to say, anyone who follows me, I'm not like the warm and fluffy advice type, but I think for me, the main point here is exactly what JJ said. Like, this is not the responsibility of people who are neurodiverse. At the end of the day, like, I don't need more allies. I don't need more conversations. I need policies and procedures that are actually implemented to support people like me, like other people. Because sure, we can have warm, fluffy conversation about it all day, but at the end of the day, if we don't actually build organizations for the people who are there and for the people who aren't there yet, if we can't build for the most marginalized person, then we have no business building an organization.
Yep. Okay. So we only have like a minute left, but I'm going to ask y'all 2 questions if you guys are fine with it. And yes, hand claps. Amen. Always. Exactly. Okay. So this one, anybody can answer this. And this is from JJ. So thank you for the question. Neurodiversity and diversity of thought are often conflated in the DEIB discourse. Have you, or would you address the difference between neurodiversity and diversity of thought?
Can we let Madison take that first?
Go ahead, Mads.
You're the expert. We should default to the person who's the expert. Let's be real. I mean, I have opinions. I know that we're all experts in our own way, but it's definitely your
So typically the way I try to explain this is it's identity versus like my opinions, where my opinions are not an identity. If you choose hateful opinions or crappy opinions, like that is something you've actually chosen. Oftentimes when people are coming to me with the diversity of thought concept, it's basically because I want to hire 2 white guys that went to the same college, but they're different because they drive different BMWs or whatever it is. We own different Patagonia vests. And so at the end of the day, diversity of thought is not the same as neurodiversity, because neurodiversity is something about yourself that you cannot change. It is part of your identity. It is baked into who you are. You having a crappy Patagonia vest or voting for a crappy politician isn't part of your identity. It's just something that you've chosen to take on as part of your personality.
The shade fan came out. Rachel, Tim, Emily, who wants to also attack that, or we can go on to the next question.
I'd like to plus one Madison on that, because it's having been in the great before times. It was oftentimes like your blackness was, or any way that you were not whatever the typical standard white male in tech was thinking, had to be aligned with them if you wanted to survive, right? And you weren't allowed to be. So we had to have short hair, no beards, the Dockers and the polo shirt and like that kind of thing. Like that was what was expected of you in the industry if you wanted to stick around. So there was neither diversity nor diversity of thought, really. But the notion that diversity of thought means like Matt said, we can have different opinions on stuff, right? You are very free to be wrong about putting beans in chili, right? That's fine. But you are not free to be wrong about saying whether folks deserve human rights or not. We're not here for that, right? And so there's a difference between diversity of thought and opinion, right? And then being non-inclusive, right? So diversity of thought is fine. That's how we get engineering substance. I think something should be done this way. I think something's great because no one's hurt by that. But if you are voicing an opinion that is hurtful, or it is advocating for being hurtful, that's not it. That is not diversity of thought at all.
Can I just build on that really quick? Ending this is going to be funny. But what I was going to say was that, I think because we're so used to masking and like downplaying everything, right? And also like, again, the pain and the other illnesses, like hiding everything. We've spent so long thinking it wasn't valid enough. And then also if you're really active in DI in general, there's no winning the oppression Olympics, right? You don't want to play these things like I have this or that. And also you want to center the most marginalized. Like, are we the most marginalized? No, like Black women are the most marginalized, like in the workplace. And like, our job is to make sure that is fixed. So I think for a long time, I didn't want to like say that I was disabled or even like identify that way or talk about it. But then I was like, diversity of thought is like people playing the oppression Olympics. It's like Madison always says, why do people want to be so oppressed so bad? And it's like, look, if I could be neurotypical and not live with all of the different health things that I live with, then I would choose that. So like, it's not a choice. This is just the way I am. And so I think, echoing what Madison said, like the reason I'm building new workplaces is the policies and practices that I put into the business and all the businesses I work with. And you can see some of them on my site, like they're very intentional so that people can show up the way they need. But I think the diversity of thought thing is sort of like it's sort of just, yeah. I mean, it's important, but we all think differently. That's not the same thing as neurodivergence. It's just not.
Awesome. Okay. This is gonna be the last question since we did start a little bit late. And anybody can answer this. Shannon said, I'm in a small org where hopefully we have room to advocate for change for things like benefits. What would you like to see? What are the specific things I should be asking my HR partner to look at for when it comes to health insurance plans?
I can tell you something right now, just with starting a new role. I just signed up for one of the things that I love about Textio, my new employer, is not just how important, DEIB is, but how they're truly trying to live it, like through benefits and support and things. And I have my first 2.5 weeks in, my first session tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. I think it's called Bravely, but it's an independent like coaching service. I had never heard of it until I came here. And the first topic I'm going to talk to them about, as simple as this may sound, as a senior recruiter who, I can recruit all day, but we're learning, right? I'm looking for better ways to organize all this information that's coming in at me, because I assume everyone here is similar. Like, I can't get enough. I'm like, I'm like a vacuum for info, but then it's organizing it once I've consumed it. So I'm using that first session just to talk through that. It's completely, between me and the coach that I talk to. It doesn't go back to the employer, but this is a perk and a support that I've never had before. And I'm already excited. So that's just one.
Awesome. Thank you. Tim, go ahead.
And so I do work for a small company, and you can do it. You can do things like, I need this, like in a very immediate sense. But if your company is actually serious about being inclusive and benefits and practices, please go have the and hire someone who specializes in this very thing, right? Because I don't know everything. I know what my needs are, but I can't predict anyone else's. If the company actually wants to make an investment in being inclusive, that's an investment. Hires a consultant specifically that deals with this, and then they can from the get-go, when they're still small, they can have these practices in place, so that way when they're large, they don't have to go and reinvent the wheel.
100%. And yeah, even my small, tiny org, I mean, I've had Madison review things for me. I've hired other consultants that are experts in disability rights and other things to make sure that the stuff that we're creating is on point and not just from the perspective of the few people we have.
Education is really the key. And then I think the other thing that we don't really think about as much as HR practitioners when we're thinking about benefits is, because I know that I make the kind of money where I can get therapy. Therapy is not accessible for everyone. And so think about how you make therapy accessible to everyone in your organization, not just the people who sit at the top, because that isn't fair and that's not inclusive.
Yeah. Okay. So we are out of time. Panelists, thank you. Maddie, obviously, Emily, Rachel, Tim, if you guys want to put in the chat where the people can follow you at, I would appreciate it. We'll be having more webinars, so check out our social media pages for all that. But welcome to the safe space, and thank you guys so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Thanks all. Bye.